is one of the most celebrated science fiction writers alive today. And he's the author of 17 novels and dozens of short stories. And those of you who are science fiction fans will recognize some of the awards that he's won. The 2 Hugo Awards, 2 Nebula Awards, the World Fantasy Award, the John W. Campbell Memorial Award, and several Locus Awards. His work has appeared in 23 languages, and it's noted for its exploration of sustainability themes, which is the main reason we've asked him to speak today and to write the chapter that he wrote for us. He's explored climate change, the socio-ecological disruption of human society, and planetary engineering in his work, to name a few related themes. Time magazine named him a hero of the environment in 2008, and the National Science Foundation sent him to Antarctica under its Artists and Writers program, and they brought him back, too. So I think that counts for something. We asked him to write the book's closing chapter because he grounds his work in plausible science and is accustomed to thinking about how the future might unfold. Please join me in welcoming Kim Stanley Robinson.
Thank you, Tom, for that kind introduction, and thank you for having me here. It's been a long afternoon, a good afternoon, filled with interesting things, and I realize that I stand between you and the reception and interesting conversations, so I am going to be compact. And really, in a room of experts like this, I realize that I do my research by reading you guys, and so what I can speak about here in a crowd this distinguished, and including, at least for a while, Herman Daly, the great theorist of post-capitalist economics, as I call it. What I can talk about is stories, how we tell stories, what stories we might tell out of a gathering like this to convince the world to the point of view that we seem to share, and then also the habit of thinking about the future as part of the human project. So the reason that my talk, my piece for this book came about the way it was for several years now, people have been coming up to me and saying, is it too late for us? Essentially the same question as the title of this book. Is it too late? And what I realized was that I could say 2 things, yes or no. And if I said, no, it's not too late, they would say, good, then really I don't have to do anything. But if I said, yes, it's too late for us, then they would say, oh, too bad, well, I guess I can't do anything. But either way, it was not a good question because neither answer leads to action in the world right now. So I began to reply to that question with the answer that is a bad question. That's the wrong question. That isn't even the question that you mean to ask, which would draw people back. And then we'd have to talk about, well, what question are we really asking there when we say, is it too late? And it has to do with this question of, have we wrecked the capacity of the earth to take in our wastes and also to produce what we need to the point where we are essentially like Wile E. Coyote, off the cliff, spinning in air, not yet realized that we are going to plunge to the ground, and that to discuss sustainability is a kind of fantasy of the Western world that is soon to come to an end? That's really the question. And the answer is, and it has been said today a couple of times this afternoon, is no, at some point sustainability comes about because the opposite is a crash. And so what we've got is there's going to be some losses in this coming century because we have done so much damage and there are so many of us with urgent needs and desires. So there will be some losses. So one way you can reformulate the question is, how much are we going to lose? And because life is robust on this planet and restoration is possible for everything except extinctions, it can be put in the terms of how many extinctions are we going to cause? Will we have the 6th great mass extinction event on this planet, the previous 5 not anthropogenic, this one would be created by us, or are we going to lose less than that? And of course, losing is really a kind of negative formulation, and so what you would want to do then is to flip the question over from losing to how much are we going to save? In the process of getting to sustainability, how much are we going to save of what we have now to give to the generations to come? So The future, as we can see it now, has a strange shape. And luckily, the illustration to this fine book somewhat illustrates it, and it even is a definition of science fiction itself. On the left, we have the utopian view that things are going to get better, that we are in a progressive history, and we can get to a sustainable permaculture where everybody is healthy and has food, water, shelter, clothing, and education, healthcare, and self-actualization, all equally, all 7 billion or even 9 billion. This is the utopian view. And then the dystopian view, that we have gone too far, that we are headed for a crash, and that we are essentially have gone too far to recover from at this point. So what's missing in this view of the future is the old middle ground. There's a great book from the 70s called Muddling Towards Frugality. Could have been muddling towards prosperity, but in any case, the idea was that just in a kind of British way of amateurly going forward and nudging the process as in a reaction to the current events, that we were going to get our way to some middle ground that is neither utopia or dystopia, but merely history itself. Now we have got the information back from the scientific community that we can't simply muddle through, that if we continue in the same economic system for the numbers that we have now, we are in an overshoot. So we're in a kind of recovery from overshoot moment. And so the muddled middle has kind of gone away. And now utopia, rather than being a good idea of dreamy science fiction writers such as myself, going back to Sir Thomas More, it actually becomes the survival strategy for getting away from the complete dystopia of a crash and a civilization, not just our species, but many species in this biosphere are in serious trouble. So the thing is that once you say our situation is very dangerous, it is a commonplace in American culture at least, and maybe this is global, I don't know, to say, well, then we're doomed because we're not good with danger. And if the situation is that dangerous, then we're just too stubborn and dim-witted to get ourselves out of it. So if you admit to danger, it's as if you're saying the dystopian choice is preordained. Well, what we have to realize is that this is a kind of media statement that sells media. And there is a kind of an op-ed philosophy that comes through in our culture that is a loose and bad sociobiology that says that human beings are not good at long-term planning, that we evolved in a fight-or-flight situation and that we're pretty good at dodging lions and getting back to the campfire, but we can't do long-term planning. You hear this a lot, you read this a lot in our press. And so therefore, since we have a long-term planning problem, we are therefore doomed to the dystopian alternative. Well, it just isn't right in evolutionary terms to say that. In fact, the reason we dominate the planet is because we are cooperative and because we did long-term planning. This is reason that a relatively weak species with not particularly big teeth or claws is able to dominate much more dangerous creatures around the planet. Cooperation and planning. We actually evolved from that. That's why our heads are so big. So when people say that we're not good at long-term planning, they usually have a guilty conscience. They usually are planning to do something bad themselves, or they're protecting privileges of their own. Or they know that we're doing something bad, and so they feel guilty about it, because it's easier to say, well, we're doing things bad because our nature is bad, and we evolved to be bad, and therefore we don't have to be concerned with it. But I'm saying, take a look at things like insurance, mortgages, debts, contracts, laws in general, wills, hedge funds. These are all long-term planning. So we have the cognitive ability and we have the legal tools already in our system of laws, which is a technology, by the way, because we have to think about technology as also being software, and that our ability to get along with each other on this planet, 7 billion of us, is a very effective software issue. So that justice, the law, social justice are all technologies that are rather effective that we can put to work to get ourselves to permaculture. So I love this example of Cuba, but it is a very important point to say that that was imposed on them and they reacted to stress. Well, now the global community is having a problem imposed on it by the biophysical realities that we're in. So in a sense, we are now all Cuba, but especially the young people. Because I was really glad to hear a talk from Eric about the Ponzi scheme, because I was invited by the McKinsey consulting company to write an article for them, which I thought was rather amazing and that they had perhaps misunderstood my work. But I took that opportunity to write an article called End the Multi-Generational Ponzi Scheme Now. And I called for post-capitalism. And McKinsey printed it. The thing is that the global culture can handle anything and still go on as it is because it's enforced, it's laws, very deeply ingrained laws that are bigger than any one nation state and backed up by guns. So you can say anything that you want. But I said that, and I think that we're in the Ponzi scheme moment where it all falls apart for the young people all over the world. So that we live with an internal Cuban, which is our young people who can't possibly live the consumerist prosperity lives that have been happening so far. So what do we say to the young people? Well, it doesn't really do to say, sorry, we torched the planet, now you have to live like saints, you know, we didn't mean to, but good luck to you. It's not a great message to take to college campuses. And it probably doesn't even do to say, now you have to live like Cubans, unless you unpack that sentence and begin to talk about how the Cubans are actually happier. They don't actually have the rest of their life living in debt. They don't have to work out in a servitude of the work of their 20s and 30s to pay off debts that they took on in order to get their education. You begin to see, as a Cuban, as a young person in the United States today, that the consumerist culture of their parents and grandparents didn't make people happy anyway, made them sick. And so it's the most heavily medicated society on earth, and it's an extremely depressed, anxious, and psychologically damaged populace because everybody feels like a rat in a cage. Nobody feels secure. We are all the precariat. There used to be the proletariat, now there's the precariat because all of us are in a precarious situation. So I think it becomes easier to say to the young, you don't need to take on the debt. You don't need to take on the useless jobs where you produce something to consume something to produce something to consume something on a kind of wheel of birth and death where it's pointless. You get to the existential question of what's it all for. You can say, it's in order to talk with other people. It's in order to do all the Paleolithic things that we used to do, to walk outdoors, to make meals for each other, to dance, to make music, to have sex, to sing, to cook. These are all low carbon burn activities. They are activities that make you both happier and healthier, both personally and planet-wise. So you can begin to bundle a story that isn't a story of renunciation and sacrifice, although, of course, joyful sacrifice is a real thing. But you can begin to make a story of a more stylish consumption, because everybody consumes, everybody burns carbon, but in this case, done at a smarter, lower level that is more scientifically valid, because it's living like we evolved to live as Paleolithics, because we're still exactly the same genetically as we were 50,000 years ago, except for lactose tolerance for most of us. So in a way, it doesn't even involve resistance, because there's a certain romanticism of the 60s to resistance. You know, we have to go out there and do civil disobedience and fight. The Dalai Lama says, you don't like something, you think something is wrong, you can just walk away. So you have the choice to not consume, especially stupid consumption that just burns carbon and and gives you high cholesterol and insanity. So it's great to have Cuba as an option. It's also interesting to look to the 2,000-watt society in Zurich and Basel. These are people who've taken the total amount of energy available to humans right now, divided it by 7 billion, and said, I'm going to live on that much and see what it's like. And what they found is they have a completely civilized life. So most of the extra carbon burn that we're doing, most of the rest of our extra consumption is just wastage. It's like lighting your cigars with the $50 bills. I mean, maybe smoking cigars is a great Cuban thing and you love it, but you don't need to light them with the $50 bills. So there's wastage in our consumption, and it doesn't get happiness or health. And I guess another story we need to tell is, 80% of the DNA inside our bodies is not human DNA. So we are very much implicated in the life of the planet. So our health as individuals is very dependent on the health of the planet. This is a good thing to remind people of. Also, we can burn about 500 gigatons more of carbon before we have torched the planet and done the James Hansen thing of turning it into Jonah Planet or even Venus, and that we have identified 2,500 gigatons of carbon in the ground. So we can burn 500, there's 2,500 there, and it's getting cheaper rather than more expensive because of these new discoveries. So we actually have to charge the true costs of things, the ecological cost being also the economic cost. This is not a tax, this is paying the true cost. And to speak to people who don't believe in this paradigm that we are bringing into the world, you could talk about not paying the true costs in standard classical economic terms. You can call it predatory dumping. If you sell something for less than it costs you to make it, you're trying to drive your competitors out of business and then take over. It's called predatory dumping. Even the WTO doesn't like it. And so you could say that we systemically predatory dump. Now, who are we competing with and beating? It's the next generation. You can imagine little tiny babies, 1-year-olds or 6 months olds, and we're kicking their ass. But of course, it's easy to do that because they're not able to defend themselves in the marketplace. So the predatory dumping is not a good, as a way to talk about the way that we price things in a way that might make people resonate to it who don't automatically agree with you to begin with. And another thing I would say is the philosophy that Eric is calling for that would cause people to rally and come together and make a change in the world, we already have. It's called science. Science is a philosophy. It is a paradigm. It is a worldview. It's even a religion. Now, it can turn into a bad religion, like any religion. It can turn into scientism, where you say, no matter what we do, science will solve it later because they'll invent a silver bullet or a pill and it'll all be all right. We'll have the next green revolution and we'll say, geoengineering is often that kind of silver bullet solution. Well, we can trash the earth because the scientists will solve it. That's bad. That's scientism. But a belief in real science is already completely imbricated and soaked through the entire culture. And the way that you can talk to people about it who are a little distrustful of that point of view is to say to them, when you are sick, do you go to the doctor? And most people in the developed world will say, yes, of course. And then you can say, well, look, you're going to a scientist. When your life is on the line, when you're feeling poorly and you're scared for your life, you go to science. So you believe in science when your life's on the line. Now the scientific community is telling you that the planet's life is on the line, the biosphere that we're part of, and you can't ignore that message. It's a necessity that we respond to that message by believing in science. And even the social scientists, and obviously when science begins to study human beings, it gets really problematic, okay? But a lot of social science consists of going to every people and asking them what they want, what they like, what they think, and then aggregating the response. So even social science is a science that's tremendously useful in figuring out what we want to do and how to do it. So belief in science, belief in government as of the people, by the people, and for the people, and to create the story that now we have a meaning in life. And this is good for the young, because you don't want to exist with a lack of meaning, and consumption is not enough of a meaning. That's just that bumper sticker, the one with the most toys at the end wins. This is a ridiculous philosophy, and everybody wants meaning in their life. So what's the meaning now? The meaning is creating permaculture, getting a civilization that is not only has justice so that all 7 billion are in the same rough position, but also can exist over the centuries on the planet and give it on to the next generations that come. So this is a macro story. This is a kind of a project. And existentially, you need a project. You need what you do in the present to be connected to a future outcome that you like, and then you work towards it. So people have personal projects, and society has social projects. Now we have a big project, and it is the long emergency, as somebody called it today. Because the situation of danger is so high, it's a kind of a World War II greatest generation moment. And that generation still vibrates with the feeling of solidarity that they had in fighting totalitarianism, and they think, oh, we had it good then. We had a project, and we were all on the same page. Now we can do the same thing because we have a strange emergency in that it's self-engendered, but it's accidental. Nobody villainously decided to overshoot the planet's carrying capacity. A lot of it comes from public health. So we've created the problem by accident, and there's nobody to blame, which in a way is a bit of a problem, because we have to blame ourselves, we have to change. And it's scary to change because you think, well, if I change enough, at the end of that process, will I still be me? And that is people would like to still be themselves at the end of whatever change they make. And what you can say here is take a look at what happened in Cuba. Take a look at what happened to the 2,000-watt society. Try the experiment yourself. Go ahead and change your habits. Go ahead and live a low-carbon burn life that is more like a Paleolithic life. See how it feels, and move on from there. So I think we can do this because I think that it is the human thing to adapt to disastrously dangerous situations. We've been doing it all along. We evolved to do it. And just because we have now a highly contentious and intense culture of 7 billion intellectuals, all of them with their cell phones and all of them fully up to speed on this situation, that doesn't mean that it is impossible to pull it off. In a way, it makes it even easier because the mechanism is there. Even organizations like World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, United Nations, and the ubiquity of cell phones, things like Google. I mean, really stupid and scary large global organizations can be put to excellent good uses simply by making the right decisions as to how to wield these global tools. So the sooner we get started on that project, the better. And the sooner we get to the reception and our conversation, the better. Oh, except Tom says that we have a little short question and answer session. And also another speaker.
I think we have time for 2 questions for Stan, and further questions. He's going to stick around for the reception. You can meet him yourself. Maybe he'll sign your book that you've bought. And then we have one more speaker after that, and then it's open the doors and head off to the reception totally. So how about 2 questions? Yes, sir. In the black shirt.
Good, thanks. Hi, Mr. Robinson. Tad Daly is my name. I'm with a think tank in New York called the Center for War Peace Studies. I'm sorry to say I haven't read any of your novels, but I will now. It was a good talk, and I will now. But I have read a bit of other science fiction, and one thing I know about science fiction, and this may be true of some of your novels, is that sometimes authors, they create a hypothetical fictional future, and the human race has evolved politically. We're not stuck forever until the end of time with the system of sovereign nation states. And indeed, there's something like a world government. Maybe that's true in some of your novels. I don't know. But I'd like to pose a hypothetical question. Let's say it happened tomorrow. Let's say it's the summer of 2013 and there really was a federal republic of Earth with a world legislature that could make world law and a world executive and a real Supreme Court of the world. And indeed, no standing armies anymore, just something like a world police force that exists not to pursue individual national interests, but to enforce world law. My question is, how would something like a world government like that enable the human race to better confront climate change in general, and climate change specifically, and environmental challenges more generally?
Well, the climate change problem is global and will need a global response. And capitalism, as it is currently is practiced, travels around the world like a gang of vampires going to the rate of greatest return, so that it'll go into an area that is ready for the rate of greatest return, and that requires a hungry but educated populace, some stability. In other words, Korea in the 60s, etc. And when the rate of greatest return diminishes in that country because the prosperity of the population wants higher labor costs, capital itself will move elsewhere to the next area and develop that one, leaving behind rust belts and leaving behind people to begin to theorize bioregionalism, because you realize you're going to have to get by on your own without global capital. So in the current system, we have a global economic system, but we only have nation-state political systems. We are in big trouble in a way that I think you're suggesting. And it would be better if we had better global political ability to control the movement of capital around the world. We also have uneven development, and a lot of the problems in this world, and you see it in the European Union, come from uneven development, where some places are better developed than others and have different currency values. so that it becomes very difficult to treat them all equally. So a lot of people are beginning to theorize not just global government in H.G. Wells' style, because this is why the UN exists, because H.G. Wells was so insistent on it in his utopian novels of the turn of the last century. And God bless H.G. Wells, great science fiction writer and visionary. But also people are beginning to theorize what they call balkanization, which is that maybe we need that bioregional watershed, local autonomy to be able to do stuff in our watershed to make a complete society in our watershed or our island like Cuba. So that I guess what we need is more of both at once, but really for the climate change problem, what we need is to use the global structures that already existed, like I was suggesting, and use those as the mechanisms for the biggest nation states to insist that the globe respond and try to cut off the ability of capital to go do its badness elsewhere. So, sorry, this is a kind of complicated, but it's a complicated issue, as you know, and it's the best I can come up with it at this moment.
One more question, please. Yes, sir.
Okay, I don't need the mic. I did read red blogs. I haven't gotten through green and blue blogs yet, but I was diverted by science. You write real science fiction, unlike a lot of the stuff out there. But a technical comment. You said you suggested humanity could get by dividing the total energy we're using now by the population, which is 2.4 kilowatts per person. I think that's too low, actually, because we not only do we need to supply energy to eliminate energy poverty for most of humanity, but we also need extra energy to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere to have any chance to avoid climate catastrophe. So agroecology plus sequestering it into the crust. So just a technical suggestion.
No, you know, the 2,000 Watt Society would say the same thing. They're saying, look, we've got the infrastructure of Europe already here. We have an advantage. And also, this is an experiment to see what it feels like as prosperous Westerners to live this way, voluntarily rather than under duress like in Cuba. So, and I think they were basically coming to the conclusion that, you know, more energy would be good if it were clean, renewable energy. What's the problem? I mean, the sun is pouring down energy on us at a stupendous rate. So the technology is there. It's really a political and cultural problem at this point. Thank you. Thank you.